Dennis, this question was for you. I wanted to ask if you could give us a little bit of an idea, perhaps by analogy of some previous things the IRS did, on how you would anticipate the case law that is to follow might fill in some of the blanks for this, because there seems to be a huge gap between the extraordinary penalties the IRS has and I know there's some situations where particularly some of the individuals that are doing the stealth filings and what have you. Do you have any thoughts on what you might envision in terms of case law, the kind of case law that might follow?
It's a good question. First of all, I guess most, in terms of penalties, in terms of penalties?
Yeah.
I mean, if you fail to report the forward bank account, you can get hit up to $100,000 or 50% of the account per year. So theoretically, if you didn't file, there's no statute of limitations. I mean, I've always looked at it as to being 50% times 6, which is the 6-year criminal statute of limitations. So theoretically, certainly they could hit you up for 300% of the value that you had in your account at its highest.
But some of these things are ultimately going to go up the chain. So
they're going to go up the chain. I think
what do you think a judge is going to say on some of these?
I think if it ultimately gets litigated and it goes to tax court, I'm not one that is very amenable to having tax court judges hear these things, because at the end of the day they're always going to destroy your client. So I believe you should try to resolve it beforehand. But if the IRS has the jurisdiction and the power and the penalty to hit you up at 50% per year, they have that right. Then a tax court, and that's what they did. If you're litigating that, you're gonna lose, because they have the power to impose that. I think the best thing to do is to try to resolve it at a lower level, like appeals. But at the end of the day, if they can punish you for that amount, then the tax court is going to say it's okay. There's case law on such things as reasonable cause and things of that nature as to why a penalty shouldn't be imposed. But if they have all the facts, they can prove it. You told people I have a foreign bank account, I'm not going to report it, blah, 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 blah. I think they can give you the max.
There's a case I'm pretty sure you already know about, but it's recently somebody was going to go into the voluntary disclosure program, but at the same time they found their tax return and checked off the box no. And what a mess. They ended up in front of a district court judge, and I'm not sure, I think it was...
You suggest you were Virginia?
Yes. Yeah. And, but they had to litigate over intent. And in that case, of course, it was not a tax court judge, because most tax court judges are former either Department of Justice people or former IRS people. But in that particular case, the judge came down on the side of the taxpayer and said, look, I mean, obviously this was done accidentally because he's filing in the voluntary disclosure program, for crying out loud. How much more disclosure do you people want? And checking off that box really didn't do anything.